Okay, so this class is on optimizing genetics. It's one of my favorite classes to teach because there's so much information about the power that you have of how you can change your life by what you do, what you think, what you say, how you move, all of it. And so as we go through this course material, there's a lot, but I think it'll make a lot of sense and hopefully give you a lot of ideas and how you can tweak your lifestyle in ways that can make a massive impact in terms of your health. So the first thing that I want to go over is that the old thinking in terms of your health was that your health and your health outcomes were controlled by your genetics. That used to be the old thinking, how we used to think everything, if my grandmother had it, if my mother has it, then I will probably have that disease. I will probably end up with that outcome. I've heard that and I still hear that from patients all of the time. It runs in my family, so it's what will be. My mom had osteoporosis, so I'm sure that I will have osteoporosis. My dad had a heart attack. I'm sure I will have heart disease. I hear that kind of thinking all the time. But please realize that there's so much more information that has come out in the last several years about how genetics plays a role, and it isn't what we used to think. And so what, again, the new thinking is that we know that there's DNA in every single cell. And as we age, the end caps or a part of the DNA called the telomere shortens. And the enzyme, there's actually an enzyme called telomerase that preserves the DNA by slowing down the shortening of the telomeres. So again, we have to figure out, how does this enzyme work effectively? What makes a difference for it to actually do its job? And what we've learned over time and over research is that the environment of the cell actually determines the ability of the telomerase enzyme to function properly. So then we ask the question, well, what controls the environment of the cell? And so this time picture that you see here, why DNA isn't your destiny, we look at the whole field of epigenetics. And what that means is how your lifestyle actually impacts what's happening within your body. So this is what we're talking about, is though, so we know that the DNA in the cell, as we age, the DNA shortens. So there's a part of the DNA that shortens, the telomeres, the end caps. This enzyme actually helps to preserve what's happening within the DNA, and it slows down that process of the shortening of the DNA. And the environment of the cell is what controls that ability of telomerase to function properly. So this is the whole field of epigenetics, how your lifestyle affects what's happening in your DNA in every single cell of your body. So as we go through this, we need to think about then what determines the cellular environment. So and when you think of what is the cellular environment, there's some major influences in terms of our health that make such a big difference on what's happening in every single cell of our body. And so tonight I want to make sure I go through those things, because one is blood sugar, another is toxicity, one is inflammation. And patients ask me all the time because they hear about inflammation. What is inflammation? It just means that there's damage to the cell. So we need to think about what's creating that inflammation, and cortisol. And cortisol is a stress hormone. So every time that you are stressed, your body actually, how do I say that? Every time you're stressed, your body produces two major hormones. One is adrenaline, the other is cortisol. Adrenaline burns off very, very quickly. It just dissipates. Your body can dissipate it with movement, with deep breathing. So when you feel that surge of stress hormones, the adrenaline is what's dissipating quick. Cortisol does not. So every time we're stressed and our body produces cortisol, we actually have a surge of cortisol that can last for quite a while. And so if we have chronic stress, we can live in an environment where there's constantly cortisol happening within our body, that we constantly have higher levels of cortisol. And that over time, when we don't mitigate that cortisol and it stays high, it stays elevated for a long time period, we actually then produce inflammation. And so all of these things are so interconnected. So when we have high cortisol, it raises our blood sugar. When we have high blood sugar, we have high inflammation. When we have toxicity within our body, it shifts our blood sugar and it can increase it artificially for time periods. But again, if we can't clear that toxicity, some people can detoxify really well. Some people do not detoxify well just because of their genetics, so they may need some more support with that. But that increased toxicity increases blood sugar, it increases inflammation. And so all of it plays together. So all of these are major influences that are affecting your body. And so when we talk about epigenetics and how we're going to shift that, our nutrition and our supplementation has a huge role. How we move our bodies and how we exercise, how we sweat makes a big deal in this picture of physiology. How much sleep we get and the quality of the sleep that we get, how we manage our stress, how we shift our energy, our frequency, our vibration, which that's a whole new field of research, and NSA fits beautifully into that. How we increase that our frequency and our vibration actually depends or makes a huge impact in terms of how the cell functions. So there's so many pieces here that you have control over that influence the activity of that telomerase enzyme. So we'll go here forward here into the next area. So the environment of the cell determines which genes are utilized to produce specific proteins that then cause specific chemical reactions. So I could tell you about all these different chemical reactions, but I promise I will not, because we would be here all night, and it's interesting, but it's not that interesting. But this is what your DNA is coding for. So when you look at like all of these like little green areas and the arrows, I mean, those are all chemical reactions that are happening in every single cell of your body. And the thing to realize about them is that your body uses nutrients, and again, the environment of the cell, whether there's high blood sugar, high cortisol, whether your body is vibrating at a really low frequency versus a really high frequency, it's going to use all of that information to determine how these chemical reactions happen. So think of your DNA is coding for an enzyme. Your body uses specific nutrients in the environment of the cell to make sure that that enzyme can be produced effectively. And so yes, there's a lot happening here, but the good thing to know is that you can influence the effectiveness of these processes by what you do in your life. So I just want to give you an example of this because I think this study was so incredibly powerful. This study had, and how do I say it? It demonstrates the whole concept of genetic expression absolutely beautifully. So there was a study done and it involved 30 men. And these 30 men had, I believe all of them had an issue with prostate cancer, and they had made the choice for whatever reason to not go through traditional medical intervention. And so what they did with these 30 men is they said, well, what happens if we study their DNA and get a baseline for them? What happens if they change their lifestyle and make healthy choices consistently, and that's a key, over a 3-month time period? Well, 3 months of healthy lifestyle changes were dietary changes, stress management practices, as well as consistent exercises. All three of those things had to be happening. And what happened is that the activity of their genes was monitored to get not only the baseline, but then what happened over that 3-month time period. What they found is that over the 3 months, the men were able to change the activity of over 500 genes. Specifically, 48 health promoting genes were turned on. The activity of those genes were actually turned on, and the activity of 453 disease promoting genes were turned off. So you have so much power. In terms of these men, they changed their health outcomes in that research study dramatically. And so what you think about is that you have so much power in terms of, again, your choices. The thing that I often see with people is that we as a culture want a quick outcome. So even if we've had maybe an issue that was part of our lifestyle, or that was choices that we were making that maybe weren't the best food choices, or we weren't exercising, or we weren't making meditation a priority, or our adjustments a priority, or whatever. But that issue then has been building up an issue in the physiology of someone for years. But we want to feel better and see a result with a lifestyle change in a day, in 3 days, in a week, in 3 weeks, whatever. So it's realizing that these people were able to make dramatic changes in 3 months. Think of what can happen to your physiology if you were making those lifestyle changes for a year, and 2 years, and 3 years. What would happen to your health and your well-being? It's pretty awesome. but you have a lot of power. So I will just want to then go through, I'm going to go through multiple different areas of health and wellness and give you ideas of things that I think are really important. And nutrition is something that you can do in your life every single day. We have to feed ourselves, but how you feed your body makes a huge, dramatic difference in terms of your health. And so my number one goal with nutrition is always to mitigate inflammation. So the article that I'm writing for the beginning of March will be on inflammation. So I'm going to give you a lot of detailed information that will come out, and you'll get that in the beginning of next month. But mitigating inflammation is probably the number one thing that you can do that will make a huge difference in terms of your health and your well-being. And so things that we want to think about to mitigate inflammation. One is keep your blood sugar steady. If your blood sugar is spiking and you're having real big highs and real big lows throughout the day, your body is creating inflammation every single time there's a spike. And so what happens within that situation then is your body literally starts to store more fat. It stores more toxicity because of that. And so we want to think of the goal of keeping blood sugar steady at all times. We want to mitigate and minimize toxicity. So when you think of toxicity, the cleaner you eat, meaning just if you can eat organic, if you can eat foods that are non-GMO, if you can think of eating less processed foods, that's going to mitigate toxicity issues. If you're going to eat meat, you want to find clean sources of meat that haven't been pumped full of antibiotics or drugs or food that hasn't been sprayed with pesticides. All of those things make a dramatic difference in terms of how you create toxicity or within your body. We'll talk more about that with exercise as well. You want to have a variety of foods. So if you're eating the same foods all the time, what has happened to the American population is most people have what's called leaky gut. We're going to do a gut class coming up later in the spring because it's such a big deal. But when we eat the same foods over and over again, it actually creates inflammation within our gut, and the cells of the gut can become what they call leaky, or there's gap junctions in the cells that should be really tight, but they get big. They get as our cells become inflamed, those gap junctions spread apart and food particles get into our bloodstream. And when that happens, our immune system does not like food particles in our bloodstream, and so it attacks those food particles and creates basically balls, complexes of inflammation that can be deposited into our joints or our brain or our organs. And so one of the things we can do to help our gut be healthy is get good bacteria into the gut, clear out bad bacteria in the gut, and eat a variety of foods so that our bodies are basically not forming reactions to the foods that we're eating. But that's a big class right there. We want to choose nutrient-dense foods, and we wanted to eat organic as much as possible, mainly because of the toxicity issue, but also because genetically modified organisms alter gut bacteria. And gut bacteria is so important for our immune system, for our brain, for our thinking, our mood, our gut, for our digestion, everything. So one of the things that I think that kind of puts this into perspective is that patients all the time ask me about questions about inflammation. And the thing to kind of put it in perspective is that one of the major drivers of inflammation is when we have an imbalance of fatty acids in the body. So when you think of fatty acids, most people think of the good fats are going to be like our omega-3 fatty acids. But because Americans eat a lot of processed foods, and processed foods are often cooked or have additives that are omega-6 fatty acids, we have a huge imbalance of omega-6 fatty acids to omega-3 fatty acids. And so they've done multiple studies on this, and they've compared us to people in Europe and other areas of the world. And what they found is that the ratio in our bloodstream of fatty acids, so omega-6s to omega-3s, should be about 4-to-1. So we should have about 4 omega-6 fatty acids to 3 omega-3 fatty acids. And what they found in the American population is we're often in a balance of 18-to-1 or 36-to-1. meaning we have so much more processed food and foods that are cooked with soy oil, canola oil, corn oil, vegetable oil, compared to like eating like fish oil or fatty fish, the good fats that are found in fish, walnuts, cashews, or dark leafy greens, or free range grass fed meat. I mean, those are the things that are going to create those omega-3s. So we have this big imbalance that's happening within our bodies, which is actually creating and driving inflammation in the body. Again, you combine that kind of like real processed food diet with high prolonged stress, blood sugar instability, and it's a recipe for having a very inflamed body that has difficulty healing. So it's something to think about, and I'll talk about like how you shift that, because it's definitely a process. So if we break nutrition down, and I kind of go through it in different ways, these are things that are important to think about. So every meal I would really like balanced with carbohydrates and fat and protein. And I would like there to be maybe a healthy form of what we call like a whole grain, which could actually be like a sweet potato or a potato. But or it could be like quinoa or black rice or brown rice. But I would like a small amount of that to be carbohydrate. And I would like a lot of your plate to be vegetables. And so I don't know when or we put a social media post that was all about how important vegetables were, and a company that follows us wrote on there, but it's so hard to do in today's world. It's really not that hard. And I'll tell you how I do this on a weekly basis for our family. But with carbohydrates, the thing to know is that your body uses carbohydrates as fuel, they create energy. And so the amount that you need is very dependent upon your energy output and how much you're going to exercise that day or during the week. It's something that you want to think of as fuel for your body. And so again, my goal on an optimal plate would be that half of your plate was full of vegetables. In our house, they're usually steamed or roasted in our evening meal. And then the lunch meal, they're usually part of a salad. So, but half of your plate, at least 2 to 3 cups, should be vegetables. That doesn't mean that you can't eat fruit throughout the day. I put some berries, frozen berries in my smoothie every morning. I usually have some kind of a fruit with a snack in the afternoon, but I try to choose fruits that are lower on the sugar spectrum. So low glycemic index fruits, meaning they're fruits that don't really throw off the blood sugar. They don't spike the blood sugar. So that's going to be things like berries and cherries and apples and pears. Oranges could work as that, actually are pretty low on the sugar content. But if you're going to have higher sugar fruits, it's just not something that you do all the time. And often when we have those fruits, especially like as an afternoon snack, we'll have it with a handful of nuts because that will stabilize blood sugar even more. The next concept, or like kind of you're looking at like kind of a ranking of carbohydrates, high fiber veggies that are lower glycemic index are awesome because they help you feel full for longer and they really don't affect the blood sugar levels. But then we go into our higher glycemic index veggies. These are going to be things like your squash and yams and sweet potatoes. So I usually have those, and those are, if you think of like a plate and you have half of it being your vegetable. So you might have then a quarter of that plate be your higher glycemic veggie. So your squash or your yam or your potato, your sweet potato, or you might choose a whole grain. So you might choose, I like gluten-free, and I can talk about that a little bit more, but a black or brown rice or quinoa. So that is going to be another quarter of the plate. So veggies, and then a quarter of the plate with either your higher glycemic veggie, index veggie, or your whole grain. And then the other thing to think about with that is that the goal, depending on how much you exercise, is that you might do higher glycemic index veggies or a whole grain, 2 to 3 servings per day. Maybe probably not more than that is necessary for most people. I try to do 2 and no more because it doesn't really work well for me to do more than that. And then we do, last choice would be processed grains. So those are going to be things that foods that are, prepackaged, that have a lot of other ingredients in them, not just the whole grain. That's going to be a more processed grain. So in that process there, in that whole picture, the reason why we talk about gluten-free so much is that there have been numerous studies that have shown that gluten is pretty much inflammatory for most people. And so it's a hard one for a lot of people to make that transition. Scott and I have had to be gluten-free for 20 plus years, so it's normal and easy for us to eat gluten-free. But when you think of that transition, it's something to definitely consider. There's research studies that have shown that gluten can really inflame arteries, can inflame blood vessels, which then increases our blood pressure. It can cause damage into the arteries, the lining of the artery, and then cause our smaller our smaller LDL particles or bad cholesterol particles to become lodged into those blood vessels, which then creates inflammation and clogged arteries. So something to consider. But there's a lot of healthy grain choices that have no gluten in them. So the next thing that we think about is protein. Protein is awesome because it's the slowest nutrient to digest. And it has the least effect on blood sugar. It helps us stay full for longer time periods. Our ideal serving is 3 to 6 ounces per meal. Depends again on your size and your muscle mass and what you're trying to support. But usually that's about a 3/4 cup serving would be about a 4 ounce serving of protein would be about a 3/4 cup size or a quarter of your plate. So now if you think of your optimal plate, you've got half of it being vegetables. And I guess I didn't really talk about, I just roast huge pans of vegetables about twice a week. So I just cut up a whole bunch of vegetables. I drizzle avocado oil on them, salt and pepper. I throw them in the oven at 400 degrees for about 40 minutes. We have lots of vegetables in our house to add to just about every meal. But when you think of that plate now, you've got a small amount that's more of your whole grain or your sweet potato. That's a quarter of the plate. You've got a quarter of the plate that's your protein and half of it that is vegetables. So the thing about protein and why it's so important is that when you would go back to like that big chart that we saw of all of the chemical reactions that are happening within the body that the DNA is coding for, the nutrients that are in proteins, especially the B vitamins, our body does not make those. And so the best way and then probably the easiest way for our body to obtain those B vitamins is from meat. And so that is just something to remember in the whole picture is that if you're not going to eat meat, you need to make sure you're planning to get whole sources of complete sources of protein between your beans and your rice or whatever you're doing. But you have to plan for that. You have to make sure that you're getting enough protein because it's absolutely critical for building lean muscle mass. It's critical for brain function, for your mood, all of it. Choose variety. So again, when we look at all of the foods, we want to eat a variety every week. So maybe each time you go to the grocery store, you buy some chicken, you buy some beef, you buy some fish, wild caught fish, but you have a variety of protein sources that you're choosing from, as well as a variety of vegetables that you're choosing from. Nuts and beans are higher carbohydrate resources of protein, but they're still very nutrient rich. And again, plan like your beans and your rice to create a complete protein with that as well. And so then we get to fat. And so I've kind of explained like the full optimal plate of just having all of these nutrients between your carbohydrates and your protein and your whole grain as well. But it's also really important to have fat at every single meal. It's important to help us feel satisfied and help us to feel full. I really recommend at least like having a tablespoon at each meal, but also, throughout the day, you might choose a nut as a snack. It's just important to not overdo fats. They do provide the building block for every single cell in your body, but we really want to focus when we talked about that study of like the omega-6s to the omega-3s. I supplement with omega-3s, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but you want to choose oils to cook with even that are anti-inflammatory oils. So those are going to be things like avocado oil and coconut oil for your high heat cooking and baking. Olive oil is a great anti-inflammatory oil for salads or very low heat cooking, but you don't want to be cooking olive oil at a high heat. But you really want to think about like things like flax seeds, walnuts, pine nuts, chia, almonds, pecans. They all have different forms of fat that can be really helpful, but we want to increase that omega-3 load. So those omega-3 fats are found in your grass-fed and finished meat, your dark leafy greens, your wild caught fish, specifically herring, salmon, mackerel, halibut, sardines. But for most people, I find it's hard for them to get enough of the good fats. In our house, we switched to avocado oil mayo. I cook with avocado oil. We quite a bit. We use and we eat fish probably twice a week, but then I also supplement with an omega-3 fatty acid supplement. So there's ways to do it, but it's really look at what fats are in the foods that you're eating and what kind of oils are being used to cook that processed food, and see if it is you consistently are seeing corn oil and vegetable oil, you know, canola oil, you definitely want to switch away from those things, soy oil, those types of things, because you're getting such an abundance of the omega-6s compared to the omega-3s and creating that inflammatory state for the body. Something to work on. It is definitely a journey. So the thing that we want to think about in terms of planning meals is that your body will always burn carbohydrates before it burns fat. And so what that means is that if you are eating a lot of carbohydrates at the end of your day, your body will always burn those carbohydrates first before you actually get to a point of the day where it can burn fat. And so as I go throughout the day, I kind of am conscious of it. And I typically do have some kind of a brown rice or a quinoa or a sweet potato, like a small sweet potato at a meal in the end of the day. But I don't usually feel well. I don't sleep well. My body doesn't handle it well if I were to have like pasta at the end of the day. So it's just think about that in terms of your planning. You just want to think about how, if your goal is to build more lean muscle mass or to decrease fat, having a lot of carbohydrate load at the end of the day is usually not very helpful. So this is just kind of the ideas that I was talking about in building your plate. Half of it is non-starchy vegetables, 1 to 2 tablespoons of high quality fat, preferably a fat that's anti-inflammatory. A quarter of the plate is a starchy vegetable, berries, low glycemic index fruit or whole grain. And then a quarter of that plate is 3 to 8 ounces of wild caught free range protein. So if you can plan your meals like that every single meal of the day, you're stabilizing your blood sugar, you're lowering inflammation, you're giving yourself really nutrient dense food that your body can do a lot with to affect those chemical reactions that are happening within the body. You're giving your body fuel for that so that you can heal well, so that you have energy, so that you're not making poor food choices later on because your blood sugar is so stabilized and it's getting the good nutrients that it needs. So that type of eating makes a huge difference in terms of just our ability to heal. When we think about snacks, we want to kind of go through the same concept, is that you could choose a vegetable or a low glycemic index fruit like an apple or berries or cherries or an orange. And then you would have some kind of a protein or fat resource with that. So, excuse me, one of my favorites is just carrots and almond butter, or a small apple and a handful of nuts, or lives like a mandarin orange, like something like that, but have some kind of a protein or fat source that can be with it. And especially if you're exercising in the afternoon, you need to fuel your body. And we'll talk about that more here in a second. So water is absolutely critical. And I know I tell this to patients all day long, but you need at least half your body weight in ounces of water every single day. And I'm going to tell you, because we live in an arid climate, we live in a dry place, I think you probably need more than that. And so I would love, and now if we've been to our network classes, I'm a very structure-based person. I like to see exactly what I'm doing. So I actually use these huge water bottles. There's a lot of water in each of those. And I went through a process of measuring, and I took a measuring cup out and I filled it up over and over and over again to make sure, see what I was actually getting. And I typically drink 3 of those every single day. And so I use cues. If you've ever been to a habit change class, cues are really important. So I think of if I'm working out in the morning, I want that first water bottle gone by 10 a.m. I want my second one done by 2 or 3. I want my third one done by 6, and I'll probably drink a couple more glasses after that. But I have different markers in the day that help me know, like, am I on track for water? So it's such an important thing. Every single one of those chemical processes that are happening within the body depends on water. So if you aren't getting enough, your body is becoming dehydrated. And the more that it becomes dehydrated, the more people have headaches or muscle cramps, or they wake up with muscle cramps, or their exercise that doesn't go as well, or they don't sweat as much as they need to because their body doesn't have the hydration resources. I also think that not only planning your water, but also planning your electrolyte and consumption. So there are times when it's really dry here, or I've added in a lot of extra exercise or hikes. We make sure that we use electrolytes. Usually I prefer them to be in the more like the mid-morning to mid-afternoon, no later than that. But that can really help people avoid muscle cramping. So there's all kinds of resources and things that you can use for that, but water is absolutely essential in terms of how your body can heal and function and how that DNA is expressed. So we go into, these are the top 5, we call them the essential supplements that I've seen over time of how people do with nutrient load and how they're going to affect their healing process. Most people could benefit from more greens. It's often hard for people to consume enough greens during the day. I usually have a couple cups of greens every single lunch. But I also use the Nutridyne Dynamic Fruits and Greens, which is basically a powdered green supplement. Because what that does is it creates an alkaline environment that will decrease inflammation. When we get really inflamed in our bodies, we actually become very acidic. And so to counteract that, the more greens that we consume, we create more alkalinity. And so that actually creates more of a healthy cell environment when it's more alkaline environment versus acidic. But again, some people really struggle with having enough greens. And so that's a simple way. You can take a scoop and stir up in water and drink it, and you're getting even more greens and more of an alkaline environment for the cells. Most people cannot eat enough fish and walnuts to create enough of an omega-3 fatty acid balance to mitigate inflammation. And so I think it's one of the most important things people could do is take an EPA DHA supplement to get more fatty acids within their body. So it can be difficult to eat enough of those foods, but when you do get that proper balance, which can take a while of really fueling yourself with the right foods, cutting down on the omega-6 oils and processed foods, and then building up your supply of the EPA DHA. But it's so important for cancer prevention, for brain health, for your joint health, for sleep, all of it. If people have been really stressed, I really want them on a basic B complex. So a basic B complex that gives them extra support of B vitamins. If you go back to thinking of that big chart with that DNA is coding for all those chemical reactions, when you think of B vitamins are used in almost every single one of those reactions as a cofactor to produce an enzyme. And so when you think of that, if you are in a really stressed time period, or you're eating a lot of sugar, maybe it's not your best choice, but it happened and you ate a lot of sugar for a time period, your body is depleted of B vitamins. So you want to make sure that you're fueling with extra B vitamins, especially during times of high stress, but also because your body cannot make them. There's something that your body has no ability to make on its own. D3K2. D3 is one of the main nutrients that help cells to communicate with each other. And so it's so important for heart health, cancer prevention, your bone health, your body's ability to use calcium and magnesium. So we want to make sure that we have enough D3 within our body and K2, and it works with D3 to help calcium absorption. So I love the liquid formula of that, because when you think about our often poor gut health that's happening in this country, we often don't absorb things well. And so if we can take it in a liquid formula, it gets right into the bloodstream and can make an impact. And then some kind of a probiotic is absolutely essential. So we want to replenish the good bacteria of the gut. And so if we've been on antibiotics, or we've gone through stressful time periods, or our digestion is off, or we've traveled, there's so many reasons why gut bacteria can be off. But Even if you've been eating a higher carbohydrate or like processed food diet, your body has an overgrowth, typically of bad bacteria compared to good bacteria, which then is affecting your mood and your sleep and your cravings. If you're craving sugar, usually your gut bacteria is off. In terms of your weight management, in terms of your digestion, having a good probiotic is so important. So I love the Clarotherabiotic Complete and the combination of bacteria that it has. It's been rated one of the best probiotics out there, hands down. Best to take about 30 minutes before bed, or 30 right before bed, or 30 minutes first, like before you eat, first thing in the morning. Just get it in though. And that's ideal. But if you're having issues with that, just make sure that you're getting it into your body. So the other thing in terms of the nutritional world is that detoxification support can be really key. So if you've been, again, we go through back to if you've been through a very stressful time, if you've had a time period where you have not eaten well and you maybe have not taken care of your body, if you feel like you're really inflamed, like your body needs support in clearing that. Or like in my family, my dad was an engineer and he was in shops and in environments with all kinds of chemical kinds of exposures that were happening. And so detoxification was super important for his health. So sometimes based on your profession and what you're being exposed to, but we kind of live in a toxic world. And so we want to work on giving our bodies support so that you can actually clear that toxicity more efficiently. And so I will let you know that just on our website under the lifestyle support section, there's a whole class that we've done on detoxification and why it's important and understanding that process. And we always have detox packages with all the instructions that Scott and I have written up over the years, and different supplements that really help to support that process, that clear inflammation and really help it basically takes your body's own chemical mechanisms and upregulates them with strong nutritional foundations that you can clear more. And so I love working with patients on that because they usually feel so good when they go through that process of detoxification. It makes such a difference in terms of their overall health. I want to get into exercise and make sure I'm okay. So I want to make sure I'm honoring people's time here. We all know that sitting is the new smoking. So my goal is that you find something that you absolutely love and that you can do it repeatedly. The key that with exercise is how you age is incredibly dependent on how much muscle mass you maintain and build as you age. So people ask all the time, like, how do I prevent, aging? Like, how do I deal with this? You build muscle. Because as you age, you will naturally decrease your muscle mass. And if you're not rebuilding it, your health outcomes decrease dramatically. So it's really important to think about your plan of how you're going to move your body and how you're going to exercise. Exercise and the endorphins it creates have been shown to increase mental health or improve mental health and be more effective than most antidepressants. And that's someone's individual choice of what they use and that kind of thing. But it does help to mitigate anxiety. It keeps you in touch with your body, how it's working, how it's feeling. But it can be such a big piece of mind-body connection. But I want to make sure that you have 3 components in your exercise routine. And I want to make sure that you're sweating multiple times per week. We talked about how important detoxification is, but your body's ability to sweat and clear things through the skin is just as important as your body's ability to detoxify through the gut. And so I want to tell you that, to put it in perspective, like Scott and I went through a time period in our lives where we moved into a house and we lived there for probably about 6 months or so. And we started to get really sick, and we found out that we had mold all through like the attic of the house and different rooms. And it was just a mess. It was a horrible, horrible situation. But when I went through that, I remember when my body became basically more and more toxic, I couldn't sweat when I was exercising. So the worse my body was functioning, I lost my ability to sweat. And it took really a lot of work of like healing, in the process of healing between nutrition and chiropractic and stress management and all kinds of things, supplements, to really get my body back on track. So realize if you're starting to exercise and you can't sweat, you need to keep going. You need to just keep working on that until you can get to a place where you can sweat, because it's such an important process in helping your body to detoxify. So I want to make sure you've got some cardiovascular exercise that's happening 2 to 3 times a week. I want to make sure you have some form of mobility. And I have tons of different videos on mobility if you need help with that. But mobility is actually moving the joints, increasing the range of motion of the joints. There are some yoga classes that can really work on mobility, Pilates classes that work on mobility, but there's also routines that you can do, like maybe for the hip and the shoulders, that keep the joints moving and well lubricated. And that will really prevent injuries when you do that. And then kind of the most important, but not really, they all go together, is weightlifting and strength training. So it's important for bone health. It's important for increasing the muscle mass. It's important you actually detoxify through the muscles when you weightlift, and it decreases inflammation. I have a lot of clients that come to Body and Balance that have autoimmune conditions or are dealing with chronic Lyme disease or mold issues that they've been exposed to, just like Scott and I were. And one of the things that is that when they're starting that journey out and trying to rebuild their health, weightlifting is such a good tool to use in that process. So, and the thing I will say about weightlifting is start wherever you can. And there's tons of videos out there. There's actually videos even on our website. So if you go to under the resources section and scroll down under the videos, there's all kinds of videos that are related to specifically to some strength training kinds of routines that also involve some cardio work as well. But you've got a lot of different options. But my goal is especially to remember with the weightlifting piece of it is that you challenge yourself. So maybe you start out with 3 pounds and you eventually, like in a month, you go to 5 pounds, and then 6 months later, you're at 7 pounds, and then you go to 10 pounds. But you need to keep increasing that, because as your body builds strength, you need to continue to challenge it if you want to be building muscle mass. And eating the way that we talked about as well helps to heal the gut, to heal inflammation, which then also helps with the process of being able to put on lean muscle mass. So just other things to think about in terms of being able to detoxify in the process of exercise. Massage can be great. Infrared saunas can be very helpful. Dry skin brushing is very helpful in being able to actually move the lymph and help with the detoxification aspect. But I just want you to sweat as well. Mindfulness, so, is such an important piece of our whole physiology and how we handle our stress. And so when you think about this, when you look at so much of what we do at Body and Balance is really when we're working on healing the nervous system and really healing the spine, we're shifting the balance between parasympathetic and sympathetic side of the nervous system. Most Americans live in the sympathetic or fight or flight side 24/7. And what that's doing is it's shutting down information for their immune system, their reproductive system, their joints, digestion, brain function, decision-making, their mood, when they're living in fight or flight 24/7. So what happens again, adrenaline dissipates quickly when we're under fight or flight stress, but our cortisol levels remain high, which then increases inflammation and toxicity within our bodies. So we've got to have tools and strategies. These are some of my favorite things. So I love to journal and create intentions while I journal, kind of like first thing in the morning or right before I go to bed. And I start to create images of what I want an experience to be like, or even something I'm anxious about. And I think about, well, what if it went the way I wanted it to? What would it smell like? What would it feel like? What would it look like? But create intentions that create kind of a vision of how you want something to happen. Other ways of creating mindfulness are find time for guided meditation or walking meditation or listening to calm, peaceful music, but actually sitting down and listening or taking time that is very purposeful. I guess if you're a walking meditation, you're going to be walking, but you're going to be taking time that's very purposeful to calm the nervous system. I love guided meditation because I love reminders to breathe. I love the music. I love often the affirmations that they use, but I use an app called Insight Timer, one of my favorites. It has meditation teachers from all over the world that have their work on that app. Present time consciousness is a strategy to just literally be present in whatever you're doing. So if you're washing the dishes, instead of looking around the house and seeing all of the other things that you need to do and thinking about that and becoming stressed, instead you think, I'm turning on the water. I am adding soap into the water. I am grabbing a dish, but you think about whatever you're doing versus allowing your mind to wander and replay anxious thoughts. Time in nature is incredibly important. One of the most researched things lately is showing how Americans, that's kind of the major thing that they're missing right now in their routines, is time in nature. Journaling, using affirmations to reset your thinking into a positive perspective instead of thinking of a negative perspective. So there's all kinds of things that you can do, but the key is that you do them consistently. So meditation might feel really hard when you first start, but the longer you do it and the more consistently you do it, the deeper you will feel like kind of slide into that meditative experience and get more benefits from it. So I encourage you to set aside time every single day, choose a strategy. Maybe it's a nature walk, maybe it's the meditation, maybe it's multiple things that you're using, but make a plan to make sure you're getting ahead of that stress level. For the network piece of it, we talk so much about the spinal piece of it. So, really helping when we're in network care, we're really shifting how the spine is functioning. We're decreasing the arthritis and the inflammation in the spine. We're realigning and balancing and healing. But the big thing that people stick with network care is because as things heal, the deeper they get into care, they get into this more of like a place where they can feel the parasympathetic side of the nervous system kicking in. They can feel how their nervous system is able to relax, their increased breath. It actually mitigates trauma, even old wounds. So there's a lot of healing that happens on that mental piece of it as well, mental emotional piece, that is so important in terms of the overall piece of health and how you can mitigate stress physiology. So there's a lot happening in there, but we want to make sure that you have tools and strategies for staying ahead of it. Specifically, some of the patterning. So if you've been to the phases and stages class, you've heard me talk about the different phases, which are when we measure what's happening within the spine, we're identifying what phase we're going to be working on. And there's some patterns in there, like a C1 pattern when at the very top of the spine. When someone has a C1 tension pattern, their brain is literally in a state of fight or flight, or their whole body is, where it's repeating what they're overwhelmed with. How are all these things going to get done? And when we start to take away that stress with the adjustment, it's like, okay, peace is restored. Those things will get done. I'm going to be okay. A phase 4 pattern, which is around C2, is like a person who just stops. They think and they think and they think, and they have trouble shutting off. So applying things like a meditation is really, really key for them to learn strategies to support that. But the adjustments will also help to create a resiliency and adaptability in that part of the spine so they can recognize where their brain is going and have strategies to be able to dissipate that tension. So there's so many different things that happen throughout that process with network care and how it supports it. Breath work, somatorespiratory integration, is a great form of breath work that moves right along with NSA care, but making sure that you're actually breathing. If you're going to use SRI, it's amazing in terms of the healing connections and mind-body connections that people make. But there's other things like out there, like box breathing, where you breathe in for a count of like, you can go in 5, I'm going to breathe for a count, you can go like 8. So breathe for a count of 8, hold it for a count of 8, exhale for a count of 8, hold that for a count of 8. But you think of a box moving. There's so many things that breath work can do in terms of calming the nervous system as well, that you want to make sure it's a tool that you're using multiple times a day, whether you're at your desk or you're with your kids or you're driving. Using the power of breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth is incredibly calming to the nervous system and can make a huge difference. Again, you are actually shifting between all of these things, all of these strategies between mindfulness, NSA, breathwork, and somatorespiratory integration, you are actually changing the environment and the frequency of which your cells are vibrating at. So you can go from a real low level state where things are not healing well to go to a real high level state where you have energy and clarity and good and positive emotion, and your body is healing. So there's so much power in that. The key to it all is being consistent. Even when things feel hard or you feel like you're not getting the result that you want, or we all would love to see the change in a week or a month, but it's being consistent with yourself and think about doing the good things and putting, kind of thinking of that as like you're creating the momentum to see the change. But the thing is that when you're shifting physiology in that study, it showed a 3-month time window of these people making healthy lifestyle changes. In 3 months, they changed the activities of genes. That's what I want you to think about, is that you have that power, and what's going to happen in the 6-month time period and the year time period of creating all of these healthy lifestyle changes, you're going to see more and more of the results. But it's not staying so attached to the result that you become discouraged and stop. Because you have to always think about, like, if you think of like where someone's at when they're really frustrated, they would give anything to be in the spot where they had been doing good things for 3 months. But if they kept looking at like, well, I got on the scale and nothing changed, or I measured myself again and it didn't change right away, or I wanted to have more energy next week, it doesn't work like that. You're healing things that have often been in your physiology for years and years and years. So it's to be consistent and that will create the biggest success for you. So things that are coming up, and I'll open up to questions here in a second, but the SRI intro workshop is coming up on the 4th. I love that class. Jay will talk about the primary order, how to identify your primary order, how to deepen your mind-body connection, how you can have so much information stored in the body that you can access with SRI, but you also can use it as a huge tool for mitigating stress and also healing trauma. It's actually, SRI is practiced in so many psychology offices throughout the country now because of its ability to help people move on from trauma, create safety around trauma. So that is kind of a big deal. But we have an SRI practitioner in the office, and she's going to be teaching that class. You all know Jay. So that will be happening. And then creating your action plan for stress. We've talked again and again about the physiology that stress creates, what it's doing to your body. That'll be on Monday, April 1st at 6:15. That will be also a Zoom class. And we want to just really we're going to go over the kind of the details of stress physiology, but more importantly, what are you going to do about that? How are you going to create the plan for it? Because in any healthy lifestyle change that I've worked with someone, stress in a stressful event or chronic stress in someone's life is typically the number one thing that pulls them right back out of that healthy lifestyle change. So recognizing what your body's cues are, what your lifestyle cues are, that can help you understand, this is how I'm responding to the stress. What am I going to do to mitigate that? How am I going to have a plan that helps me overcome that? And so it's not constantly dragging me down. I think it's one of the most important things that we could go over. So I've had a lot of clients ask me more and more lately, but when you look at, maybe I can do this. This is risky for me. I'm not a technology person. But okay, so if we go to this page of our website, so if you go to bodyandbalancechiropractic.com/blog, so if you go into the resource section and hit this blog tab on the drop-down box, that there are all kinds of blogs that are here that we've written about NSA care. And then now I'm adding more and more of the health and lifestyle articles as well. So this last one was on the top 5 reasons you should consider magnesium as part of your wellness plan. But there's all kinds of articles that are on reorganizational healing, the triad of change. Are you internal or external? All kinds of stuff. So you've got options. There's a lot of stuff out there. And then, so just know that, and that is also, those articles are emailed to you in the middle of each month. And then there's always an attachment to the health and wellness article that's at the beginning of the month that's sent out via our newsletter. But if you can't find that stuff, just make sure you go to our website, because I think those articles can be really helpful in your health journey. So thank you for coming. I'm reminding myself of how to use technology again. I haven't done a Zoom class in several months, so hang with me. But thank you so much for attending. And if there, as a thank you for coming tonight, we also are providing a 25% off supplement coupon for any of our attendees. So make sure you let our staff know if there's something that you want to purchase. The supplements that we talked about can be really supportive in terms of your health journey and your wellness.